The marketplace was alive with noise and heat. Traders shouted, children ran, and the smell of food and dust mixed in the air. But at the center of the chaos stood a cage that everyone avoided, yet everyone whispered about. Inside the cage was the alien woman. Her skin was blue, shining under the sun. Her eyes were sharp, but her face was tired. Chains wrapped around her arms and her clothes were torn. To the crowd, she was a monster, a savage, a killer. But to him, the new soldier, she was something else. His name was Arik, a young human soldier in rusty armor. He was strong, but his heart was softer than most. When he was told to feed the alien woman, the other guards laughed. They said, "Be careful, boy, she will bite off your hand." Another one added, "She killed her own kind. She is cursed." Arik tried to smile, but inside he felt uneasy. Why was she locked up like this, under the burning sun, treated like an animal? He did not know, but today he was going to find out. With a wooden bowl of food and a jug of water, he walked to the cage. The crowd moved aside, afraid to get close. Arik stood before the woman. Their eyes met through the bars. For a moment, the world grew silent. He saw anger, pain, and something he could not explain in her gaze. The alien woman stood tall, even in chains. Her beauty was strange, not human, but powerful. Her presence made his chest feel heavy. Arik placed the food on the ground just inside the cage. The alien woman did not move. She only stared at him, her eyes burning like fire. He waited, sweat dripping down his neck. Then finally she crouched, slowly, like a predator. Her fingers touched the bowl, but she did not eat. Instead, she pushed the food back toward him. The crowd gasped, whispers rising like smoke. "She refuses," someone said. "She will starve." But Arik stayed still, confused. Why would she push away the food? Then she whispered, her voice low and broken, not human, but still clear. "You, not them," she said. The words hit Arik like a blade. His heart thumped in his chest. What did she mean, not them? He wanted to ask, but fear locked his tongue. The commander shouted from a distance, "Hurry up, soldier! Do your duty!" Arik nodded and tried again. He slid the food back toward her and poured fresh water into the bowl. This time she looked at the water and her lips trembled. Her hands shook as she lifted the bowl and drank. The crowd murmured, surprised. "She drinks, but only from him," a man said. Arik did not understand, but deep inside he felt something stirring. This was not the act of a savage. This was the act of someone thirsty, desperate, and human in her own way. Every day after that, Arik returned. He brought food, and she waited. She never ate in front of the others, only when he was there. And every time, she whispered a few words, broken but real. Arik began to notice more. The scars on her arms, the bruises on her back, the way she looked at the stars at night. This was not a monster. This was a prisoner, a widow, some whispered, a cursed woman, others claimed. But to Arik, she was simply a soul trapped in chains. The people called her savage. They threw stones when the guards were not looking. They spat near the cage, but she never shouted, never attacked, never begged. She only kept her silence, her eyes full of stories untold. One evening, after giving her food, Arik noticed something inside the cage. Scratched into the wooden floor was a picture, a small, rough drawing of two figures standing side by side. One tall, one small, their hands touching. His chest tightened. She had drawn her family. She was remembering someone she lost. When their eyes met again, Arik felt a shiver. Her gaze was no longer just angry or tired. It was pleading, sear. Ching asking for something he could not name. He realized then she was not refusing food. She was refusing to live like an animal. She wanted dignity. She wanted someone to see her as more than a savage. That night, Arik lay awake. Her words echoed in his head. You, not them. What did she see in him? Why did she trust him and no one else? The marketplace would call him a fool for caring, but he could not shake the feeling. This was the beginning of something dangerous, something forbidden, and something that would change both of their lives forever. The savage in the cage was not savage at all. She was a woman, broken but alive, and Arik was the only one willing to listen to her silence. The story of fear, pain, and love had just begun. Days turned into weeks, and every day Arik returned to the cage. At first it was just duty, a task to feed the alien woman, but slowly, it became something else. He no longer walked with the heavy steps of a bored soldier. Now his steps were careful, steady, and full of quiet purpose. The alien woman waited for him. She did not wait for food, she waited for him. Her sharp eyes followed him through the crowd, and when he appeared with the wooden bowl and the jug of water, her face softened, just slightly. To others she was still the savage, chained and feared. But to Arik, she was something different every day. A mystery, a question, a mirror of pain and strength. She rarely spoke, her words broken and heavy with effort, but silence itself became their language. When he placed the food near the bars, she would take it slowly, carefully, and for a brief second her fingers brushed his hand. He never pulled away. The touch was light, but it felt like a promise that she was not lost, not yet. Arik noticed more details. Sometimes she would scratch the dirt with her nails, drawing shapes he could not understand. Other times, she sat with her back against the cage, humming in a voice low and haunting. The melody was strange, alien, yet full of sorrow. When he listened, he felt his chest tighten, as if the song belonged to a world he had never seen but somehow missed. The other guards mocked him. "You waste your time, boy. She will never thank you," one laughed. Another said, "Better to let her rot. That's what she deserves." Arik never answered. He only kept walking with his bowl and his jug. Deep down, he knew they were wrong. This was no monster. This was no curse. This was a person, suffering alone. One evening, after the market closed and the torches burned low, Arik lingered near the cage. The alien woman sat in the shadows, her knees pulled close to her chest. The silence was heavy, broken only by the crackle of fire. He whispered softly, not knowing if she could understand. "You are not savage," he said. Her head lifted, her eyes caught the dim light. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in broken words, she whispered back, "Savage is lie." Arik felt a chill. Someone had given her that name. Someone wanted her to be seen as a monster, but the truth was beginning to show. From that night, she began to share more, not with full sentences, but with pieces. Words like home, fire, family came from her lips. Her voice cracked each time, and sometimes her hands shook as she spoke. Arik listened, and in listening he felt the bond grow stronger. He began to bring small things. Cleaner water, a piece of cloth to wrap her wounds, even a fruit when no one was watching. Each time she accepted, and each time her eyes softened. She never said thank you, but her silence carried the weight of gratitude. One night, as Arik placed the food, he saw her trembling hands press against the ground again, scratching shapes in the dirt. This time, the shape was clearer, a circle with lines reaching out like a sun. Beside it, two smaller shapes joined together. Arik stared at it, then at her. She looked back, her lips parting. "Family," she whispered, her voice breaking. Arik swallowed hard, his throat dry. She was not drawing monsters or curses. She was drawing her memories, her loved ones, the family she lost. The bond grew in the silence. Arik spoke less, listened more. He began to notice how she lowered her head when strangers shouted at her, but lifted it high when he came near. He noticed how she never touched the food given by others, but always ate what he brought. To him, this was trust, fragile and precious, and he guarded it with his heart, but danger was growing. The guards had begun whispering too. "Why does she eat only from him?" one said. "Maybe she is tricking him," another replied. Their suspicion was sharp, and Arik felt the weight of their eyes. Still, he did not stop, because when she looked at him, he saw something more powerful than fear. He saw hope. One evening, rain poured over the market, drenching the ground. The cage leaked, water dripping over her shoulders. But she did not complain. Arik came with a piece of cloth, pressing it against the bars. She looked at him, surprised. For the first time, her lips curved into something like a smile, faint and trembling, but real. Arik felt his heart pound. That smile was more valuable than gold, more powerful than any sword. As the days passed, the bond grew strong, invisible, but unbreakable. She was no longer just the alien woman in the cage. To Arik, she was a soul reaching out through silence, through whispers, through broken words, through eyes that carried oceans of grief. And to her, Arik was no longer just a soldier. He was the first hand that did not strike, the first voice that did not curse, the first human who dared to see her as something more. The world still called her savage, but in the quiet space between them, she was simply alive. And in that silence, Arik found something he had never expected. He found a bond built not with chains, but with trust, a bond that would lead them both into danger, into love, and into a future that neither could yet imagine. The cage still stood in the marketplace, the chains still bound her wrists. But in her heart, a spark had been lit, and in his, a storm was beginning to rise. The bond between Arik and the alien woman grew stronger with each passing day. He still did not know her full name, nor her story, but her eyes spoke louder than words. They carried secrets, heavy and painful. Arik felt that if he listened long enough, he might discover the truth hidden behind her silence. One evening, after giving her food, Arik walked away, but did not return to the barracks. Instead, he moved through the narrow streets of the marketplace, searching for someone who knew more. Rumors floated like smoke in the air. Some said she had killed her husband in cold blood. Others swore she was cursed by her people, but none of it felt true. Arik had seen the sadness in her eyes, and sadness did not belong to killers. Finally, he found an old trader sitting near a fire. The man was wrinkled, his beard long, his eyes sharp with memory. When Arik asked about the alien woman, the trader grew quiet. He glanced around to make sure no one was listening, then whispered, "She is not what they say, soldier. She is not savage. She is victim." Arik leaned closer, his heart racing. "Tell me," he urged. The old man sighed, his voice heavy. Her people lived in the mountains beyond the desert, peaceful and proud. One night, raiders came. Not her enemies, but men who wanted power. Her husband fought to protect their home, but he was slain. She was taken alive, chained, brought here as a prize. They called her savage so no one would pity her, so no one would see the truth. Arik felt the blood drain from his face. The woman in the cage was not a murderer. She was a widow, a soul broken by war. The crowd that spat at her, the guards that laughed, all of them were blind to her suffering. And he, Arik, had been sent to feed her like an animal. Shame burned inside him. The old trader leaned closer. "Be careful, boy. If the masters know you are asking questions, they will silence you. The story they built must remain, or else the market will lose its prize." Arik nodded, his jaw tight. He thanked the trader and walked away, his heart heavy with anger and grief. When he returned to the cage, the woman sat in silence, her head bowed. Arik knelt by the bars, whispering softly, I know what they did to you." Her head lifted slowly, her eyes met his. For a moment, he thought he saw tears glimmering. She whispered one word, broken and soft. "Home." The sound of it cut him deeper than any blade. From that night, Arik changed. He no longer treated his task as duty. He treated it as honor, as promise. He cleaned her wounds more carefully. He brought her fresh bread. He even smuggled a small flower from the fields outside the city and placed it inside the cage. She stared at the flower for a long time, then held it close, as if it was a piece of her lost world. Arik's chest tightened. He wanted to give her back everything she had lost, though he knew it was impossible. But trouble was growing. The guards began to notice his care. "Why do you waste good food on her?" one spat. "Why do you linger when your job is done?" another mocked. Arik ignored them, but he could feel their suspicion rising. He knew one wrong step could bring punishment, not only to him, but to her. Still, he could not stop. One night, as the moon shone pale over the market, Arik brought water in a cleaner jug. As he slid it through the bars, the woman reached out, her fingers brushing his hand. This time, she did not pull back quickly. Her touch lingered, light but full of meaning. Her lips moved, whispering words in her broken human tongue. "You, kind." Arik swallowed hard, his throat tight. "No," he whispered back. "I am only listening." The bond was no longer silent. It was growing into trust, into a fragile bridge between two worlds, yet Arik knew bridges could be burned easily, and the fire of hatred was everywhere around them. Days later, Arik overheard something that chilled him. The commanders were speaking near the armory. "The crowd grows restless," one said. "They think the savage is too quiet, too weak. Maybe she is not dangerous after all," another replied. "Then we must remind them. We will plan her execution before the next moon." Arik's hands clenched into fists, his heart thundering. They wanted to kill her, not for crimes, but to keep the lie alive. He stumbled back into the shadows, his mind racing. How could he let her die when he knew the truth? That night, as he gave her food, he could barely keep his voice steady. He leaned close to the bars, whispering, "They want to end your life, but I will not let them." Her eyes widened, her breath quickened. For the first time, she reached out with both hands, gripping his tightly through the iron bars. Her chains rattled, but she did not let go. Her touch was desperate, pleading, alive. In that moment, Arik knew the truth was no longer just a secret. It was a burden he carried, a burden that would lead him to risk everything. The cage no longer held only a prisoner. It held the beginning of rebellion. It held the weight of hidden truth. And in Arik's heart, the fire of defiance had been lit. He would not let her story end in silence, not while he still had breath. Arik's heart was no longer calm. Every time he walked to the cage, the words of the commanders echoed in his mind. "They will execute her before the next moon." Those words haunted him, pressing heavy on his chest. He had discovered the truth, and now he could no longer stay silent. The alien woman watched him each day with sharper eyes. She seemed to sense his worry, his unease. When he brought her food, her hands lingered on his more often. Her whispers grew a little stronger, a little clearer, but still broken, still heavy with pain. "Danger," she said once, her voice trembling. Arik nodded, knowing she understood more than he imagined. At night, in the barracks, he could not sleep. The other guards laughed and gambled, while Arik stared at the ceiling. His thoughts burned with questions. How could he save her? What would happen if he tried? Was he willing to risk his life for hers? Deep inside, he already knew the answer. The next morning, Arik carried fresh bread instead of the stale scraps the others gave. He had stolen it from the kitchen, risking punishment. When he slid it through the bars, she hesitated, then took it gently. Her lips moved, almost forming a smile. For a moment, Arik forgot the fear. That smile was worth every risk, but not everyone was blind. The guards had begun to whisper louder. One said, "He treats her like a queen, not a beast." Another sneered, "Maybe he loves the savage." Their laughter cut into Arik's pride, but he said nothing. He knew speaking would only bring more eyes upon him. Still, he felt the danger growing. One evening, when the market was almost empty, Arik brought a small cloth hidden under his armor. He slid it through the bars. The alien woman looked at it in surprise, then touched it to her bruised arm. Her eyes softened, her lips parted. "Why?" she whispered, her voice fragile. Arik leaned closer, his voice low. "Because you are not savage," he answered. Her gaze locked with his, and in that moment silence spoke louder than any words. The bond between them had crossed into forbidden ground. This was no longer kindness, it was loyalty. It was defiance against the lie that chained her, and Arik felt the weight of it press on him with every passing day. The marketplace grew louder with rumors. People said the savage had grown tame, others said the soldier had been bewitched. Arik ignored their voices, but deep down he knew the execution was drawing near. The commanders wanted blood, and they would not wait long. One night, Arik overheard them again. "We will make it a spectacle," one said. "The crowd will cheer when the beast is burned." Arik's stomach twisted, his fists clenched. He could not let it happen. He would not let her die for a lie. That night, he walked to the cage with water. The rain had begun to fall, cold and heavy. She sat shivering in the corner, chains clinking as she moved. Arik knelt close, his voice low and urgent. "They want to kill you soon," he whispered. Her eyes widened, fear flashing across her face. But before she could speak, Arik continued, "I will help you escape." Her breath caught. Her chains rattled as she leaned closer. For the first time, her hands gripped his firmly, tightly. Her voice trembled. "Trust you," she whispered. Arik's chest tightened. He knew then there was no turning back. From that moment, every step he took became a risk. He smuggled cleaner food, hiding it under his armor. He washed her wounds when the others were gone. He even whispered stories of his home, of stars and oceans she had never seen. In return, she whispered fragments of her life, words like mountain, child, fire. Each one carried pieces of the truth. Each one made Arik's anger burn hotter. But danger followed close. One guard noticed the flower Arik had given her still resting inside the cage. He snarled, "Who gave her that?" Arik's heart raced, but he forced his face to stay calm. "She must have stolen it from the ground," he lied. The guard spat, but suspicion lingered in his eyes. Arik knew his time was short. That night, as thunder shook the sky, Arik whispered through the bars, "When the storm comes, I will open the cage." Her eyes widened, filled with both hope and fear. She touched his hand through the bars, her chains rattling. "Together," she whispered. Arik nodded, his heart pounding. "Together." The word echoed in his soul, stronger than any vow. But even as he planned, he knew the danger. If they were caught, both would die. If they failed, she would burn. But if they succeeded, they would be hunted forever. Still, Arik no longer cared. His loyalty was no longer to the guards, nor to the market. It was to her, the woman they called savage, but who had shown him more humanity than the rest of his world. The rain poured, lightning flashed, and in Arik's heart, the decision was final. He would risk everything, even his own life, because saving her was no longer just about duty. It was about love, hidden deep but burning bright. And in that storm, the first step of their escape was waiting. The cage had become a prison for her body, but Arik knew soon it would also become a battlefield for his soul. The risk was heavy, but his resolve was heavier, and the fire of rebellion was about to break its chains. The storm had passed, but Arik's mind was still full of thunder. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the alien woman's hands gripping his, her whisper echoing, "Together." That word had bound his heart, and now there was no turning back. But the danger grew faster than his plans. The commanders had called a secret meeting in the hall of the guards. Arik slipped close, pretending to polish his armor while he listened. Their voices were sharp, heavy with authority. "The crowd is losing interest," one growled. "The beast has grown quiet. They do not fear her anymore." Another answered, "Then let us give them a show. 3 nights from now she will be executed. The fire will remind them of her savagery." Arik's hands trembled, nearly dropping the cloth. 3 nights, that was all the time left. If he did nothing, she would die in front of cheering crowds. Her truth burned with her body. His chest ached with fury, but he kept his face calm. No one could know what was now in his heart. That night, he returned to the cage. The marketplace was quiet. Only the sound of insects and flickering torches remained. She sat close to the bars, waiting for him. Arik knelt, his voice urgent and low. "They want to kill you in 3 nights." Her eyes widened, her breath quickened, and for the first time, he saw true fear in her face. Chains rattled as she reached through the bars. Clutching his hand with all her strength, Arik leaned close, whispering, "I will not let it happen. We will escape." Her lips trembled, and then she whispered back, "How?" Arik's heart raced. He had no clear plan yet, only a promise. But now, that promise had to become real. He whispered again, "There will be a storm again soon. Storms always come this season. In the chaos we will run." Her eyes searched his, desperate yet trusting. She whispered a single word, "Believe." And in that moment, Arik knew she did. The next days were filled with danger. Arik moved carefully, stealing small things. A piece of rope, a sharp knife hidden under bread, a cloak long enough to cover her. Each theft was a blade over his neck. If the guards caught him, he would hang beside her. But his hands did not shake, because every stolen piece was a step closer to freedom. Still, whispers followed him. One guard muttered, "He spends too much time near the cage." Another laughed. "Maybe the beast sings him to sleep." Arik ignored them, but his nerves tightened. The eyes of suspicion were growing sharper. He had to act soon. Then betrayal came. On the second night, as Arik prepared to bring her food, a fellow guard blocked his path. The man sneered, "I've seen the way you look at her." Arik's blood turned cold. The guard leaned closer, his voice dripping with malice. "Maybe I'll tell the commanders unless you share what you hide." Arik forced a smile, shaking his head. "You imagine too much," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, but inside, panic spread like fire. If the guards spoke, their plan would be ruined before it began. That night, Arik moved faster. He slipped to the cage and whispered, "We must leave tomorrow. Not wait for the 3rd night. Someone suspects." She gripped the bars, her voice shaking. "Tomorrow," she repeated. Arik nodded, his heart pounding. Tomorrow would decide everything. The sky grew heavy with clouds again, promising rain. It was the sign Arik had prayed for. A storm would cover their escape, hide their footsteps, drown the voices of their hunters. But fear gnawed at him. Was he leading her to freedom or to death? That evening, he gave her the cloak, sliding it through the bars. She held it tightly, her fingers trembling. He whispered, "When the lightning cracks, I will open the cage. Be ready." Her eyes shone in the torchlight, and for a moment, Arik forgot the chains, forgot the bars. It felt as if they were already free, standing side by side. But freedom had a price. Arik knew the locks were strong, and the keys were kept by the commander himself. He would have to steal them, risking everything in plain sight. As he lay in his bunk that night, he stared at the ceiling. Sleep never came. Only the thought of her waiting in the cold cage. Only the echo of her voice. Together. When the dawn broke, the market buzzed with life again. Arik moved through it with calm steps, though his heart was a storm inside. He watched the commander laugh with other soldiers, the keys dangling from his belt. Arik's hands itched, his mind racing with ways to take them. Every second that passed brought him closer to danger, but also closer to her freedom. That night, the clouds gathered, and the first drops of rain fell. The marketplace began to scatter as people hurried home. Arik's chest tightened. The moment had come. He slipped toward the cage, his cloak heavy with hidden rope and knife. The alien woman was already standing, her eyes locked on him, chains rattled, thunder cracked, and in that instant, Arik whispered through the bars, "Tonight, we break the lie." Her hands pressed against his, her chains biting into her skin. She whispered one word, fierce and unbroken, "Free." The storm roared louder, and with it, the escape plan was set in motion. Auric no longer feared the risk, for love had made his heart stronger than fear, and by the next sunrise, the cage would either be empty or both of them would be dead. The storm raged above the city, thunder cracked like drums of war, lightning split the dark sky, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. The marketplace was nearly empty, torches blown out by the wind. Only the sound of chains rattling inside the cage remained. Auric stood close, his cloak heavy with water, his heart pounding like the thunder. In his hand, the stolen keys felt like fire, stolen from the commander while the man had drunk himself into sleep. This was the moment he had waited for, the moment that could free her or destroy them both. He pressed the key into the lock, his hands shaking. The chains clinked, the rusted lock groaned, then snapped open. The alien woman gasped softly, her glowing eyes fixed on him. For the first time since he had met her, she stepped forward without bars between them. Her chains rattled against her wrists and ankles, but her body was free of the cage. She pulled the blanket tight around her, hiding her blue skin from the night. Auric whispered, "Stay close to me. We must move fast." She nodded, her lips trembling, but her eyes steady. Together they slipped into the storm. The rain beat against their faces, the mud clung to their boots. The market stall stood abandoned, fruit rolling in the water, cloth torn by the wind. For a moment, it seemed as if the city itself was helping them escape. But freedom never came so easily. A shout split the storm. "Escape! Escape!" a guard cried. The clang of weapons followed, the sound of running boots on stone. Auric grabbed her hand, pulling her through the alleys. The storm covered their footsteps, but torches soon flared behind them. They ran, their breaths ragged, their hearts racing. Auric's sword clinked at his side, his hand tight on hers. The alien woman stumbled once, her chains dragging, but Auric caught her before she fell. "Run," he urged, his voice fierce even in the rain. She obeyed. Yed, her trust in him stronger than her fear. The guards spread like wolves, blocking streets, shouting orders. "Don't let them escape," one roared. Arrows hissed through the air, some striking the mud near their feet. The woman gasped, her body trembling, but Auric pulled her onward. His mind raced. He knew the city better than she did. There was only one way out, the old aqueduct near the southern wall. They turned down a narrow alley, splashing through water. The walls closed around them, the storm's roar echoing. Behind them, boots slammed closer, the guards' voices louder. Auric pushed her forward, his breath burning. Just as they neared the corner, a figure leapt out. A soldier, blade raised. Auric reacted without thought. His sword flashed, steel against steel. The clash rang through the storm, sparks flying. Auric's muscles strained, his heart roaring like fire. He shoved the soldier back, striking hard. The man fell into the mud. "Go!" Auric shouted, pulling her past the fallen body. Her eyes widened, but she did not stop. For the first time, she ran not as a prisoner, but as someone who believed in freedom. But the chase grew fiercer. More guards poured into the streets, their armor glinting with lightning, their shouts echoing through the storm. The commanders had been awakened, their fury feeding the hunt. Auric's lungs burned, his legs heavy, but he refused to let go of her hand. If he fell, she would fall, and he could not allow it. They neared the aqueduct, its stone arch dark against the sky. The rushing water beneath promised escape, but also danger. Auric glanced back. Torches burned behind them, the glow of their hunters closing fast. He turned to her, his voice sharp and urgent. "We jump." Her eyes widened with fear, but she nodded, trusting him even in madness. Together they climbed the slippery stones, the rain making every step dangerous. The keen. Uard shouted. Arrows flew again, one grazing Auric's shoulder, blood mixing with rain, but he did not slow. He pulled her up, their hands gripping the cold stone. At the top, the water roared below, a wild river born from the storm. Auric turned to her, their faces inches apart. Her eyes glowed in the lightning, fierce and alive. "Do you trust me?" he shouted over the storm. She nodded once, firm. "Always," she whispered, her broken voice carrying more strength than the storm itself. Auric wrapped his arm around her, then leapt. Together they plunged into the water, the roar swallowing their cries. The river pulled them under, cold and merciless, chains dragging her down. Auric fought, his arms burning, his lungs screaming. He held her close, kicking against the current, refusing to let her sink. They burst to the surface, gasping for air, the storm pounding above. The river carried them away from the city, away from the torches and the shouting guards. But arrows still hissed, soldiers racing along the banks. The chase had not ended, it had only grown wilder. Auric wrapped his arm around her, keeping her afloat. "Hold on," he gasped. Her hands clung to him, trembling but strong. The storm carried them farther, the city fading into the distance. Yet behind them, the fire of pursuit still burned. The cage was gone, but now the whole world had become their prison, and in the darkness of the storm, their fight for freedom had only just begun. The storm carried them far from the city. The river dragged them through mud and foam, crashing against rocks, tearing branches from the banks. Arik held the alien woman tightly, his arm burning with pain, but he never let go. When at last the current weakened, they crawled onto the shore, their bodies shaking, their breaths broken. The night was dark and cold, rain still falling in thin sheets. Arik lay on the ground, chest heaving, his wounds bleeding. Beside him, the alien woman coughed, water spilling from her lips, her chains still, heavy. But she was alive, her eyes glowing faintly under the storm's fading light. For a long moment they said nothing, only breathing, only surviving. Finally, Arik turned his head, his voice weak but steady. "We are free. For now." She looked at him, her lips trembling, then whispered one word. "Alive." The sound of it gave Arik strength, more than rest or food ever could. They moved slowly into the forest, away from the river's roar. The ground was wet, the air heavy, the night full of strange cries. But they walked together, her hand gripping his arm for balance, his body leaning against hers for support. For the first time they were not soldier and prisoner, but two souls bound by survival. At dawn, they found shelter beneath a cliff. Where dry earth hid beneath a rocky overhang, Arik gathered broken branches, his hands shaking from exhaustion. With sparks and patience, a fire was born, its light soft against the dark stone. The alien woman stared at it, her eyes reflecting the flames, her lips parted, whispering in her broken tongue, "Home, once fire." Arik watched her carefully, his heart aching. He could not give her back her home, but he could give her warmth. They sat by the fire, silence between them, but not empty silence. It was a silence full of meaning, of trust, of unspoken promises. Arik wrapped his cloak around her shoulders, ignoring the cold that bit his own skin. She pulled it close, her eyes soft as she whispered, "Why, help me." Arik looked into the flames, his voice quiet. "Because you are not savage, because you deserve to live." She turned her face toward him, her gaze sharp and wet with unshed tears. Slowly she whispered, "You, different." Arik's chest tightened. He remembered the words she had spoken in the cage. You, not them. Now he understood what she meant. The others saw her chains, her skin, her silence. But he saw her heart, and she saw his. As the days passed, they moved deeper into the wilderness. The forest gave them food. The river gave them water. The fire gave them warmth. But danger still lurked. Hunters searched. Torches sometimes flickered in the distance. Arik knew they were not safe, not truly free. Yet in her presence, even danger felt lighter. One evening, when the stars burned bright above, the alien woman lifted her chained hands toward the sky. Her voice was soft, broken, but filled with meaning. "Stars. Same stars my people see." Arik followed her gaze, his heart swelling. He whispered, "The stars belong to no master. They belong to us all." She turned to him, her lips parting in the faintest smile. For a moment, the world was not chains and pain, but hope. That night, by the fire, she spoke again. Her words were slow, heavy with effort, but they carried a story. She told him of mountains covered in snow, of children running in fields, of songs sung around fires. Her voice cracked when she spoke of the raid, of her husband falling, of fire consuming her home. Tears ran down her face and her hands shook. Arik reached out, wiping her tears gently, his voice soft. "You are not alone anymore." She looked at him, and in her eyes was something new, not just sorrow, but light. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them grew deeper. She learned more words in his language, slowly but wit. Determination, he learned to read the expressions in her eyes, the meaning in her silences. Together they built not only shelter, but trust, not only survival, but love. One evening as the fire crackled low, she whispered in broken human tongue, "You saved me." Arik shook his head, his voice firm. "No, you saved me. You showed me what it means to fight for something greater than myself." She touched his hand, her fingers warm despite the cold night. "Love," she whispered, the words small, fragile, but powerful. Arik's heart ached with the truth of it. Yes, it was love, not built in comfort, but in chains, in storms, in danger. A love forged in fire and sorrow, unbreakable. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. The hunters still searched, the commanders still plotted, but as long as they walked together, they carried something stronger than fear. They carried the gift of humanity, the power to love even when the world called it weakness, and in that love was strength, hope, and freedom. The cage was behind them, the city was behind them, but their story had only begun. Two souls from different worlds, bound by trust, surviving by courage, and guided by love. Not savage, not cursed, not broken, only alive, only human in the ways that mattered most. And under the endless stars, they walked forward together into a future no one could take from them.